Hey, everybody. My name is Tim.
And I'm Jonathan Lunsford. How are you doing?
And you are watching Exploring the Secondary, where we talk about secondary issues within Christianity. And overall, once again, our goal, while Jonathan and I may disagree on a plethora of random secondary issues, and we agree on some as well, we
Right.
just want to show you that we can have these iron sharpens iron debates. Don't shy away from them, but at the same time, still fellowship with each other. So,
Absolutely.
Jonathan, what are we talking about tonight?
Well, we're talking tonight, and actually, so the name of the show is Exploring the Secondary. So we're talking about most of the secondary issues. Tonight, we're actually going to go with what we, military terms, a tertiary issue. So I think tonight being our first tertiary conversation, I want to just take a moment to say that these are things that aren't written out. These are things that are kind of just preference, but have some background to it, and it's not as written as solid as a secondary issue is. But these are massive issues in the church. These split churches, these cause problems and division. So tonight we're talking, as you see the title, about megachurches. Are they good? Are they bad? Are they biblical? Are they not? So we're going to have a little bit of a time tonight. We are actually live on both of our Facebooks. This is the first time we've gone live on Facebook. We normally just do YouTube only. So if you're watching and you think you would enjoy this, follow us on YouTube or follow us on Facebook, and Exploring Secondary is the name of it, and check us out. We try to go live at least once a month. We're trying to do it a little more often than that, though. It's kind of hard to schedule wise. So.
Yeah, and by the way, we always encourage our live audience comment in.
Yes,
and if you got questions, drop them in. If you got comments, drop them in. We will definitely hit them up as we go along, and especially at the end as well. So I think the important thing, because like we've always said, words matter. What is the definition of a megachurch? Jonathan, what you want to go first on that?
Well, so I mean, we'd even discussed the number. What's the number? And we talked about it before we went live. What is the official number that makes it a non-mega church to a mega church? What's the number? So that depends on what you watch. It depends on what Google search you click into. So I think that there were some that were saying 3,000. Some were saying 2,000. I think if you just did a blanket Google search, it would say 2,000. So 2,000 members or 2,000 attendees weekly constitutes a mega church. Your definition of a mega church may be different than Google's definition of a mega church, but I think are going to be landing on 2,000 plus, 2,000, 3,000 is what we're kind of hitting at tonight. That's my number. I don't know what Tim's number is. I don't know. I would say
it's basically right around there. I did like most of the research I've ever done was like 3,000 congregants that attend that church on a weekly basis. Basically, any given time, 2,000 to 3,000. Most of the numbers I was looking up was roughly around the 3,000 mark. But like, there are 3,000 people inside that church on Sunday or whenever you hold service.
So does that mean 3,000 accumulative over the services, or 3,000 in a service, or is it 3,000 members?
So before
we get too deep into that, what are you calling that?
Cumulative. Yeah,
that's what if they have 4 services, 7 services, or whatever over the weekend. Because some churches have a Saturday night service and then 2 Sunday morning services. And if those equal 3,000, that's what you're calling.
Basically, yeah, like some churches would have a 9 o'clock, a 10:30, 12. Your basic Sunday service, but cumulative wise, would equal out 3,000 or 2,000, depending on. It's an ambiguous term.
It is.
But basically, all we need to know is megachurches are big churches, hence the name megachurch. So your definition might be different. If you see a giant, large church with a huge building and a whole bunch of people that go to it, and you got people out there waving you in with parking, and you got the meters, and you got a big old coffee shop in there and a store and all this stuff, there's multiple different definitions on what you can say a megachurch actually is. But I think everybody has their own, and that's cool. Let's roll with that.
Before we get too deep into this, there's a comment I think that we need to address before we get too far into it, and that is from Pathway to Truth. Does this consider satellite churches as well? I would say maybe.
Yeah, I think. So,
I mean, yes, no, I don't know.
Most satellite. So I no longer go to. Spoiler alert! I'm going to be on the side of like I wouldn't call myself anti-mega church, but I'm not pro mega church.
Yeah.
I used to go to a mega church, and almost every megachurch that I knew of during that time in my life, in my walk with God, had those satellite campuses. I've never seen, and I'm active duty military. I've been doing this for 20 years, traveling around the country, visiting church to church to church. I've never seen a smaller church, let's just say 400 congregants and down, have multi-site campuses or satellite campuses. Yeah, that was definitely one. I see Pathway. Yeah, by the way, if you got questions, bring them up, put them in there. We're going to go over them at the end, and I'm going to make
we might not get to it every time. Sorry. I gotta send this to somebody real fast before we get rolling.
No, you're good. So first I want to talk about, while he's doing that, I want to talk about basically the rise of megachurches, how they got popular. Now, megachurches, we didn't really start seeing them as a thing until roughly around, you could, once again, this is very ambiguous, but roughly around the 1950s, you started seeing this pop up a little bit more and more. You started seeing it really in the 70s. There was a church out there over in California, the name's eluding me right now, that started getting popular. And then around the late 70s, 80s, and especially in the early 90s, in my definition, where you really saw the rise of big popular mega churches was with, over on the East Coast, or I guess you could say Midwest, Bill Hybels was running a church called Willow Creek Community Church. And then over on the West Coast, Rick Warren was starting Saddleback Church over there. And those were really what you would call the modern definition of a mega church, these big, huge churches. Now, there's other various forms out there, but in my mind, that's really kind of the historical rise. We saw this mega church, big, giant churches, satellite campuses, stores in the church and coffee shops and all this type of stuff. You really started seeing this rise, as opposed to the older method of a local gathering of people in, a small church building. Maybe you had a place to do potlucks, but really just maybe 100, 200, 300 people going into that local church. That's kind of the historical rise that we see. Like I said, really dating back to the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. That's really where I saw it.
And it was really like suburban areas that where people were moving out to the suburbs, and those churches took off that way. It was, you went to Lakewood in Houston. I saw that. That was under John Olstein, his dad. Totally different man, by the way. Totally different. Anyway, it was in the suburban places where these churches were really starting to grow, and it's not only, and this is another thing, a lot of people, because it's there's no particular thread of denomination. It's not Reformed versus Pentecostal or Charismatic Word of Faith. Mega churches could be any of them. There are, I would say, more on the charismatic side, but I would also say that there's a whole lot of them are Reformed. If you're talking 2000, I would say.
Oh yeah, I mean, just to go over some examples of various mega churches, we already said, like Pathway to Truth pointed out, Lakewood Church, ran by Joel Osteen, now considered a mega church. You have maybe on the other side of the theological camp, you got Grace Community Church, ran by John MacArthur over in California. That's another example of a mega church.
Is he still a senior pastor?
Yes, he is. Okay. Health, keep him in your prayers. But yeah, he's still senior pastor over there. And then, to give a more modern example that maybe people know, the largest church in the United States today is actually, I live in Oklahoma, not too far from me up north, Life Church, up in the Tulsa area, is considered the largest church.
But it has satellites. It has satellites, though. Is that?
Yeah, they count those satellites as part of the congregation. But that's considered, the largest church in the United States. So Life Church, a lot of people know that Greg Rochelle's the pastor there. They're the ones who created the Bible app and all that kind of stuff. So you see a lot of, just to give you some examples of what a mega church is. Say again?
I said, I love me some Craig Rochelle.
Well, we could talk about that later. Oh, all in good fun. So that's basically a couple examples there. So now we're going to kind of break in. Like I said, spoiler alert, we're about to go over it. Yeah, I'm a little bit more on the I don't like the megachurch model. Jonathan's going to be on that side of this is a megachurches are a good thing. So we're going to go ahead and just talk about it and do some iron sharpens iron. Jonathan, you want to go first talking about it?
You talking about the opening statement kind of thing, or I'm sorry, I was looking something up. See, Life Church 2018 claimed 85,000 members and reached about 300,000 people on a weekly online. That's what the numbers that came up. So I don't know if that's true or not, but you have to be careful what you find online because it's not always true. That's what Abraham Lincoln said. So it's important.
300,000 for Life Church was actually what I was seeing in a lot of the church stuff that I follow, like on my other channel. I research a lot in the mega churches, and from what I've seen, those 300,000 from the satellite campuses, because they'll project, they'll do the projection thing.
Yeah. There's actually one in my hometown, or they used to be. I don't know if it still is or not. They had a pretty good little group. And what's interesting about that is in that satellite group, there's a pastor there that's over that congregation of people, but on Sunday morning they listen to Craig preach. And so but they're able to move around. They do different places and stuff. That was the one in Franklin. I don't know how they are nationwide. I don't know the answer to that one. So, but for me, the opening statement for me is, and I would rather go second on this, but it don't really matter because I'm not opposed to mega churches. I think that there are. I don't know that I've been okay. So this is weird. I've been in a sanctuary with 5,000 people in a sanctuary where it was what was the name of that church in Gainesville, Georgia? Jensen Franklin's church. We went to and there was 4,000 seats in that sanctuary, and he has 4 services a day. And at the time, he was flying to California to do a night service every Sunday. So he was reaching in person like upwards of like 12,000 people. Cannot remember the name of that church. Saved my life. Anyway, we went a couple times, or no, we went once, and it was huge, and it was like it's different.
Free chapel.
That's it. Which is a congregational holiness church denomination. But you can none of their paperwork says congregational holiness, none of the website, but it is technically a congregational holiness denomination. But anyway, so I'm not opposed to mega churches. I understand there's people who don't like mega churches and they want a smaller congregation. I think that there's ultimately, like we were talking about before, this is a tertiary thing. This is not in scripture. There's nothing that says no mega churches, or nothing that says, get into mega churches or nothing. But at the same time, it's all about the connection that you have with God, right? And if you can do it in a mega church, then do it in a mega church. If you can't do it in a mega church, and you really can't do it in a mega church, then don't go to a mega church. Most people don't even have access to a mega church, honestly. I mean, I would say I got some numbers up here. There's, according to Google, there's 1,750 mega churches in the United States. That's not a lot. I mean, and that's at the 2,000 number. So most people don't even have access to even go to a mega church. I don't see anything in the Bible that says not to. I don't see anything that says don't do it. I've searched over the years and really thought about it, but I don't see it. And I know that people disagree on that, and that's fine. But I'm just saying, from my perspective, I'm all about it. I have been to University of Tennessee, where the stadium is for the basketball. They had a youth conference, and of course that's just 3 days, and then we all go back to our normal churches. And 22,000 teenagers was awesome. That was the greatest time. One of the greatest times I've ever had in that setting. But that was 2-3 days and go home. That would be interesting to do that all the time. But I don't personally. My opinion is I don't have a problem with them biblically. And I know that's very flat. I'm sorry, that's not very powerful.
No. I mean, sometimes simple is better. So one of the reasons that, and then I guess I'll get into my point if you were done with that.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, one of the reasons. So actually, I got a few. There's a few reasons why I really don't like the megachurch model, and why my opinion, I feel like Christianity overall would be better if we did not have that model. And the main reason being is I see the recipe for disaster in the megachurch model. Not saying that all of them will be a disaster. I want to be clear on that. I don't think all mega churches are bad, but I see the recipe for disaster in there. And mainly it's because of the type of environment that a megachurch will normally breed. And I'm talking in generalities. Once again, I am not talking specifics as in every single church is going to be this way, but in general, from my research and what I've done, a lot of megachurches are ran more like a CEO corporation as opposed to what I would say a biblical model for a church. Now, like Jonathan said, it is very clear the Bible is not prescriptive in how we run church, meaning it is not in black and white saying we will run church this way with this size and this many people, and you can only have this type of what, you know what I mean? XYZ. Right. It is descriptive in some areas, but it's not prescriptive.
Right.
And one of the reasons, like I said, going back to what I was saying, is I see the recipes for disaster when we are having that more so CEO mentality, where you have mega churches that have a senior pastor who is basically the CEO. You have a board of directors as opposed to a board of elders. And actually, a lot of churches have moved, the mega church has moved to that model. They don't have a board of elders that run that church. They have a board of directors, and then there's a board of elders underneath them. And I see that very corporate style. Another thing that I found out, and not all mega churches do this, but the majority of them do, is they don't have membership inside those churches. And the reason why they do not have membership is because members, as voting members, you have a say in who is inside that church. You have a say in how that church is operating. But if you don't have members, then you don't have a say. Everything is going to be ran by the board of directors. Now, obviously, you can kind of maybe do social media push and all that stuff if you want to try to have a say, but it's so much harder as opposed to say like a voting member system where you can nominate leaders. You can effectively affect change inside your church if you want to, or say there is a leader that is just corrupt out of nowhere. Something happened. The devil grabbed a hold of him and he is being corrupt. And you can remove that leader as members if you move it to a motion and nominate it. But most megachurches, famous example, everybody remembers all the stuff that's going on with Gateway Church right now. Gateway Church used to be a member church. And then when they became incorporated, because churches come incorporated, when they became incorporated, they removed membership. They did not have membership at that church. And they actually wrote that into their constitution, no membership, and everything was going to be ran by a board of directors. And a lot of those board of directors didn't even go to that church. It was outside entities overseeing. They had elders, but the elders, in my personal opinion, and I might not be doing this justice, but my personal opinion from what I read, the elders really didn't have any power like the elders did that you see in the Bible. So once again, are all megachurches bad? Absolutely not. Do megachurches do good things? I think so. I think they're out there in the community. They're spreading the gospel. You're pooling resources together to send missionaries out. Those are the beautiful things I see about megachurches. But I also believe you can do that as a collective of multiple churches as opposed to just having one giant megachurch. Because once again, that recipe for disaster. And I mean, I can get into the tax stuff where the lack of financial transparency and, ridiculous beachside parsonages that aren't even close to the actual church itself. But we can get into that more if we get into it as we talk along. But basically, like I said, not all mega churches are bad. I just see the recipe for disaster built into mega churches.
So one of the things is that most mega churches are what's the word I'm looking for? Nobody knows where they are. Nobody knows about them. And there's 1,750 mega churches according to Google.
Woo.
Right? In the United States, 1,750. I could probably name 15, 20, maybe. And so years ago, when I was still living in North Carolina, Georgia area, they had a pastor from Two Rivers come to a small church. Turns out I knew his dad. His dad was a small time pastor, and he was the pastor of Two Rivers in St. Louis. And he told us that there was 4,000 seats in the sanctuary. And we're all like, that's crazy. And they had 3 services every Sunday. I'm like, never heard of that church. Still, except for that time meeting him, Brian Cutshaw was his name, I think. That was the only time I ever heard of that church. So was there scandal? Apparently not. Never heard of it. If it was, swept under the rug maybe, but that happens everywhere. But
yeah, small and big.
To your point though, about, you kind of have over the years, and I know you haven't said it today, but over the years, you and I have talked about this, and one of the negatives about it is the chances and the possibility of corruption. For sure, there is that possibility, and some crazy scandals can happen. Whether it's at what's the church you mentioned a minute ago? I don't know what this called, or it doesn't matter the denomination, doesn't matter the background. It's apparently all you gotta be is in Dallas, and something's going on in Dallas. I don't know what it is. What
Something's
like
in the water over
3 or
there.
4 different preachers in there, and megachurch preachers. And it wasn't all charismatic people too. It was just like there was a crazy time. Not Lakewood. What was the name of that church you just mentioned?
Gateway.
Which I mean, I knew of Gateway because of Carrie Job, not because of that preacher. That's the only reason I knew where Gateway even was, or that there was a Gateway, just because of listening to Carrie Job's music and whatnot. So anyway, Brian Cutshaw made a comment years ago. I mean, this is 15 years ago, probably. 15 years ago for sure. And he made a comment about how his church owns. They have the 501c3 side, and then they have the LLC side. There's 2 different sides, right?
I'm glad you brought that up.
What the LLC side does is it owns business, or like it don't own business. It owns businesses. It owns like apartment complexes. It owns like strip malls, all these kinds of things. It owns it. And so, and it's all, and he was saying that it's all paid for. So all the money that comes in is immediately dumped into the 501c3. They pay the people. They help create jobs in that congregation. So they have mechanic shops, lawn care, child care, and all this stuff. And then all these buildings they have to have a maintenance crew, and then they have all this stuff that goes with it. And because of the rent that comes from those buildings, they're able to employ 1,000 people or whatever in the community. They're able to, jobs and all that kind of stuff. So the LLC side does that. But he was saying, of course, again, corruption, absolute power corrupts absolutely. He was saying that all of the profit from that, after payments and overhead, goes to the church. And the church all of a sudden has it to the point where he said, we don't have to send the offering plate around because we have enough money to function the church without sending the plate around. So now the plate goes around, and that money can go to missions, or that money can go to different things like that. So will that model work in a smaller church? It can. It would require the congregation to be on board with it and whatnot. I think there's a difference if it's a board of elders on the 501c3 and a board of directors on the LLC side, and they can both be part of Lakewood or whatever, Crossway, whatever church they're in, as long as the goal's right. Now, back to what we're saying, corruption, it shows up. It'll rear its head, and there's nothing that we can do to thwart that in advance, other than be very cautious, be very careful, make sure that stuff's been done right. You have to be really cautious. So, but anyway, so like, is that pastor being that guy? If that pastor's that guy, then you run into some concerns there. But I'm going to tell you, I'm going to stop here for a second. But the megachurch model does have corruption. But I know a lot of little churches that have a whole lot of corruption. I know churches here in this town that I live in where the pastor likes to take out, he likes to do stuff, or there's since I've moved here in 2011, there's a church in town that the pastor had to resign because he was sleeping with the piano player that wasn't his wife. And there was the same church later on, one of the elders was sleeping with the Sunday school teacher that was not his wife. And so corruption happens, sin nature happens, whether it's a small church or big church. And that was one of the points I wanted to make, was that corruption can come from a big church and a little church. And yes, it's possible that it gets hidden more in a big church. However, there are families that control churches that shouldn't be controlling churches just because you have the right last name. And they can decide at Sunday dinner, because half of them are deacons, that they didn't like what the preacher preached on, and so they're going to push the preacher out because the family decided that he's got to go. And to me, that's as corrupt as anything that Gateway did. I know it's corruption, and it happens in both models. So that's part of the reason that I'm not so against it, but I also am aware of what you're talking about. I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and to your point, like scandals happen in small churches. I think one of the things that I see differently, a sin is a sin is a sin, and I want to make that absolutely clear.
Right.
One of the things that a megachurch will have is the sheer amount of people that they are influencing through their preaching and their teaching. So when a megachurch has a scandal, obviously everybody and their mother finds out about it if you keep up with, current church business or in the church world or even just famous names. Look, you can go through the list of it. And while it's just as bad as what's happening down in the local church, it's much more isolated, bringing less reproach, I guess you can say, upon the Christian church as a whole. I'm talking about the universal body of Christ. Whereas you see the megachurch model, and I pray it doesn't happen, but let's just say, largest church in America, Life Church, Craig Rochelle gets into a scandal. Everybody is going to know about it. Now, that's not happening that we know of. I want to make that absolutely clear. But I'm just using that as an example. Or another tagline, like going back to the Gateway model, when Robert Morris had his incident and basically was removed from ministry, the enemy really saw that as an opportunity to go ahead and rail on religion. And not only that, they used it for political purposes. Like, this was Trump's pastor who blah, 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 blah. So, oh yeah, because he was on like Trump's political advisory or religious advisory team, something like that. But you see what I'm saying? When you have these larger churches, the sheer amount of people that they influence, and then the media grabs a hold of it, things of that nature, and once again, brings a lot of reproach down. It was interesting that you mentioned the LLC thing, because that was one of those things. Now, you brought up a good point to it, one that I never thought of. I can admit to that. I never thought about that. But at the same time, one of my biggest qualms was the lack of financial transparency when it comes to those things. So, example, Elevation Church, huge mega church up in Charlotte, North Carolina, pastored by Stephen Furtick, very popular. They're the same way. They own multiple LLCs, strip malls, things of that nature, they employ. And one of the dangers that come with that, because you are a church, because you're a 501c3, you don't have to be very financially transparent when you file those 990 forms. You can opt out to even filing them sometimes. And you don't have to list certain things on there. And when you do that, the ability for money laundering going back and forth is really, really real. Another example, and you go to the Trinity Foundation, they did a great article on this, and I can't remember the church name to save my life. There is an example of a church that bought a parsonage that was a beachside property, millions of dollars over there in Florida. They bought the parsonage, and they basically sold that parsonage to their former senior pastor when he was leaving for a ridiculously low price. That former pastor then sold it for market price not too long after he left. And when you see that kind of stuff happening, like I said, that's only going to be made possible once again in that mega church world.
I don't know. I mean, it might not be that size, but that can still happen that can still be a double wide trailer with 10 acres in the backwoods of Texas. The same thing can happen. But I just
$1 million.
I mean, are with the threat of scandal is enough to stop just because there's a possibility of money laundering. Yeah. Okay. Well, there's a possibility, but that can happen in a small church too. Small pastors do the same thing. And so yes, accountability is what's in question here. It should be accountable. Everybody should be accountable for the money that's coming in. You should be able to go to your pastor and say, hey, how much money did we bring in last quarter? And where did it go? You should be able to do that if you're there. But at the same time, have you really researched to see if you can? Have you
for my local churches? I know, that's one of the big.
pick a mega church and look it up, dig into it, find out and see if you can see it. Is it available?
Like for the 990s or
No,
for like
for
financial
their financial transactions go. You might not see everything they bought at Home Depot, but you can see they spent $20,000 at Home Depot or whatever. I mean, have you looked into it?
Yes. Yeah, and you
all
can.
1,750 of them?
No, not
I mean?
all 750 of them, but the majority of the ones that I looked at, like I said, they don't file. If you go to their 990s, because it's public information, we can look this up. Very, very little is put down on there for what actually is on there besides the bare minimum. Like I said, a lot of them don't even fill out the 990s.
Yeah. But
so you don't even know what they're actually bringing in.
Also, I mean, are you picking the ones that are with scandal, or are you trying to find something you never hear of and then look into that?
Well, usually something's going to ring to my mind on why this church was up here. So I'm going to go ahead and look.
Churches that already have issues are probably going to have more issues. Yeah. I mean, I get that. That's true. I mean, if they already have one issue, there's a good chance they're going to have another one. I mean, no doubt about that. But like, I don't know. I just think it's so according to Google again, back to Google, who knows? And I assume this would count for Catholic churches and all of them, but there's 380,000 churches in the United States. 380,000. Now, I don't know, that's probably not a very accurate number because a lot of them shut down, but a lot of them meet at homes. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But that is less than 0.5% of the churches is mega churches. Less than 0.5%. Way less. So, I mean, I don't know. I just that's been my like. I looked up, did the math, no, and like my whole thing is that there's corruption everywhere, and to throw all mega churches, and I know you're not doing that. A lot of people do though. A lot of people will throw mega churches under a blanket bus, and like just because 3 of them did it, don't mean they all do it. You know, like so because you. I want to say one more thing back to the LLC thing, and then we can just move on from that. The Mormon Church owns the Walgreens, or did. They own the Walgreens chain.
They do a lot of stuff like that.
And if they're doing that, and they're taking the profits and rolling it back into their church, I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with that. If your local church decided they was going to start a lawn care business, and all the profits rolled back into the church and stuff, and they hired 15 teenagers and they worked all summer and they gave them some work ethic and stuff, and you told me that they did that, I would be excited. Yes, get some boys working and get some men working. You know, people need jobs. You know, like give them a chance, and the church can do that too. The question, you have to make sure your ducks are in a row because you don't want to be, you don't want to be wrong with it. You want to make sure you keep your be godly with it for sure.
Mm-hmm. So another aspect of that I didn't really talk about in the whole opening thing, issues that I had, and this is once again my personal experience with this, just visiting so many churches, and I was an attendee for a little while. Once again, at a big mega church, it was Champion Center in Tacoma, Washington. If you ever get a chance to look that up.
Is that the name of the church, Champion Center?
Champion Center. Anyways, big stadium seating, your typical mega church. So anyways, I was going to that church for a little bit, me and my wife, when we first got married. One of the things that kind of struck me, especially after I started actually reading my Bible more, was that I started seeing, when I started learning more about accountability, was personally the lack of personal accountability, not to the leadership. That's another separate issue, but more so at me as a person. So in a mega church, I have the ability to be able to basically sneak in, sit somewhere, and sneak out and have no real accountability on my life. I actually had a friend of mine in the Army. I won't name him out loud, but I had a friend of mine in the Army who went to a church, actually, when I was living over there in Louisiana. He went to, I always called it Six Flags Over Jesus because they built that giant cross right outside of Fort Polk, Louisiana. But I can't remember the name of the church. But anyways, he said he loved that church because that church was easy for him to go in and go out and nobody knows who he is, which is, once again, a very sad attitude.
But it's not a very big church.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a mega church.
No,
but it was big enough for him where he felt comfortable enough to do that.
According to Google, there's only 3 in the entire state of Louisiana.
Oh, wow.
And mention Christway. I'm like, no.
No, it's not.
Oh,
Anyway,
Hill in Place is the largest one for sure.
or in
That's
Baton Rouge.
a massive sanctuary.
But anyways, so my
Sorry.
wife and I, we were living in sin at this point in time of our lives. Bad. Like I'm talking going out, living in drinking on Saturday night, going to church Sunday morning, and then going back to living in the world on Monday. We were fake Christians. That's the best way that I can put it. We had no accountability inside that church. One, they didn't have memberships, at least at that time, from what I remember. Maybe they do now. And then two, we loved how we can get in there, hear a 15-minute, at least at that church. Not all mega churches are like this, but this one was 15 to 20-minute watered down sermon that didn't make us feel bad about our sin. And we left. And there was no like fellowship going on inside that church. And it wasn't till later on in life, I want to say it was like 10 years after that. Nah, maybe not 10. I don't know. About 5 years after that, we were like, let's try out a small church. And we went to a small church that met in a middle school that had maybe 35 members in it. And it was wonderful because I'll never forget the first time I stopped showing up. My wife and we were going there for probably about 6 weeks, and then football season hit. And once again, I was not a Christian at this point, but football season hit. So I'm like, well, the time zones, I can't watch my Cleveland Browns play. So I'm just going to go ahead and skip out in church. And I'll never forget the pastor of that church is like, hey, Tim, you haven't been coming for a couple weeks. What's going on? And then I was like, felt convicted. I'm like, man, I got to tell him I'm skipping the church to go ahead and play football. But that little bit of accountability was enough to place some conviction in me that I need to go back and be a part of this local body, this assembly, to be with those people. And I wasn't getting that in the megachurch. The megachurch is more so, there are small groups you can get into, and they'll help you do that. But that's basically how much you kind of put into it. In a smaller church, what I've experienced, even when I went to Louisiana, Christway Church, where Jonathan goes, we were going to church together over there. That church, I had accountability there. I'll never forget Pastor Vic, the pastor over there. I skipped one Sunday night Bible study because once again, going back to the Browns, me and my football, I wanted to watch Sunday night football. And, that next Wednesday, he was like, so I didn't see a Bible study. Bet you were watching the Browns on Sunday night, though. And I was like, I just never got that out of the large mega churches, that personal accountability. When I might be walking in areas of my life that could be sin. If you're, in that mega church, let's just say I was cheating on my wife and sleeping around with somebody else, no one would ever be the wiser. But in a smaller church, and especially in a smaller town, things catch on a little bit more.
Pastor might not care because he's busy doing it too.
Yeah, that's a possibility. Anyways, I talked a lot about that. What's your thoughts on the accountability thing, Jonathan?
I mean, you're right. I mean, most of the most mega churches are micro denominations anyway. And they are, if they're attached to a denomination, they're not for very long. I'm also of the mind that denominations are, over the next 50 years, will kind of dwindle away anyway, and you'll have more movements than you will denominations. And which you kind of already see in that. I mean, they're still around, but it's not as near as intense as it used to be. But anyway, the accountability is important, and the small groups is where a lot of that's at. And so there's a church in Phoenix that a friend of mine used to go to, and they started small, and all of a sudden they got big. And they, over the course of like 15 years, they went from 300 to 3,000. Like, it took them 15 years to do it. And one of the questions that I would try to pose here, I guess, is what do you do if a church gets big and you're a member of there? And it's kind of like one of them slow boil things. You're not going to feel it right. All of a sudden it's going to be bigger, and you're in the middle, like, wait, this is a big church all of a sudden, and there are times that at my church, and I'm in the back, one of my jobs is to be in the back and eyeball new people. Right. And because that's one of my jobs, see out new people, talk to them, make sure they know where to go, how to sit, make sure they know where the restroom is, all that kind of stuff. I tend to miss the people that have been going there for a long time because I'm kind of busy with them. And then you have those people who just hightail it out of there really fast, and they don't, so how do you account to them? You don't ever see them. Part of that could be thrown into the idea of that megachurch. Anyways, to Phoenix. The one of the things that they did in Phoenix that I really appreciated hearing about it, and I even asked him the other day, and I'm still may get this detail wrong, but I've been to Phoenix just in and out. Mega cities, it's different for me. I've never lived other than my little bit of time in San Diego in the Navy, but like when you have a church and it's growing and there's 4,000 people, whatever, and the pastor at that particular church he was going to, they kind of broke up the congregation based off of like elementary school, to the point where, like, even if you didn't have a kid, your house, if you had a kid, what elementary school would they go to? Well, they go to, George Washington Elementary. Okay. So everybody whose kid would go to that one gets kind of put together in a life group, and they meet on Wednesdays or whatever night they fit. They meet different places. And there was even a point where when that life group got to a certain size, that church would be like, okay, guess what? You guys are y'all's own church now. Y'all have fun with it, run with it. And they'd put a pastor over it, and they'd take off and they'd start their own congregation. And so then it would allow, now you got more people coming in and allow more people, and the church would grow in that mindset. There was a comment earlier that discipleship, I don't remember who wrote it. The last word was discipleship. I see it right there. And he's right. Mega churches, Christ-centered, rooted and foster real communication or community and discipleship. That is as Brian wrote that is true. It has to be discipleship. It has to be Christ-centered. It has to be focused that way. I got it right here. I'm going to mispronounce it, so please don't come after me. YOIDO. YOIDO. It's in South Korea. Mm-hmm. They have 800,000 people weekly that come in through their sanctuary. They have their sanctuary holds over 12,000 people. Capacity 12,000. The pastor's name is Young Hoon Lee, and it says here pastors 526 pastors. 526 pastors. I did read years ago about this church that you can only go to church there for 2 years, and then you have to leave. And the idea is that in those 2 years, discipleship is so important that you meet constantly, and then you get to a point where they send you out. They go be a part of other places, other people. It's Yodia Full Gospel Church. It's in Seoul, South Korea. It's the largest church, non-Catholic based in the world. They actually send missionaries to the United States. But anyway, which they should. Thank you. It says according to Assemblies of God. So I didn't even realize it was Assemblies of God Church. If it is, and if that is, that would probably make it the largest Assemblies. Yep, world's largest Assembly of God's church. And it's in Korea. And discipleship is important to them. And I think that if they're able to pull it off and are able to work it and make it happen, then do it. Run with it. 526 pastors means that there are a lot of people in full-time ministry to help with 800,000 people.
So you brought. Oh no, go on. You brought up an interesting concept. So something my dad always told me, especially when I told him I was interested in ministry after I got out of the Army. My dad was associate pastor for a little bit, and his advice to me, he was like, Tim, if you ever do, and you get to be, the pastor of a church, if you can't say the name of every single normal attendee at that church, then the church is too big. And one of the things you brought up was the breaking away of a church. So, and obviously that's called church planting or church revitalization in some cases. And I think that would be my answer back to the megachurch, because it's not always good to just have a problem. You want to have a problem and then offer a solution. My solution was always to be, why not break that church up and plant that. So if the church is good, it's got a good model, it's preaching the gospel well, it's doing proper preaching, proper checks all the boxes. Instead of that church growing up, why don't we let that church grow out? So if it gets to the whatever point that you may put it on, it doesn't have to be what my dad said, but whatever point you
that's
kind of
not a
put
lot
it
of people.
on. Yeah, it depends how good your memory is. But
Exactly.
you get to that point, and instead of buying a newer building and a bigger building and doing this and just, why not just, hey, that church down the road over there, that church is dying out. The congregation ain't going anymore. Let's revitalize that church. Let's buy out, talk to the pastor over there, see if we could buy the property initially, anything like that. It can come multiple different ways, but basically, take an elder that you have been raising up who aspires and desires and meets the biblical qualifications for a pastor, put that person over there along with some other solid men inside your church as elders and deacons and whatever, and basically you start up that church from over there. And there's a few ways I've seen that done. Mark Dever, if you don't know who Mark Dever is, he runs Capitol Hill Baptist Church over in Washington, D.C. He's known for his church planting efforts, and he's got his ministries called Nine Marks Ministries. Anyways, that's one of the models that they offer to suggest doing. And really how that looks is you would ask part of your congregation, be like, hey, 10 miles down the road is church B, we're church A. We're trying to see if there are members of our church willing to go over there and revitalize that church. We're putting, Elder Johnny as the teaching pastor, and we're moving elder, whoever, a couple elders over there for accountability, basically using all the same models that you did for your church, but it's a different church. And it's not a satellite because it's not owned by you per se. It's basically
You let it go. It's its own thing.
It's its own thing.
Pick it out of the nest. You don't require money back from it.
Exactly. And because the main point is, if you're doing something good in that town that you're at, instead of growing bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, why not move it to the town over across the way that's, 10, 15 miles away, and they can start something. And then you start popping up these good biblical model churches all over the place. So once again, that usually called like church planting or church revitalization.
Sounds like what apostles do.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the modern definition for apostle is literally a messenger or sent one. And the modern day equivalent, most scholars agree on, to what an apostle is, would be in a missionary or a church planter.
That's that's a different discussion.
Yeah, that's
a different
we'll
topic.
Get into that one day.
So accountability, pastor's responsibility in large churches, we kind of hit on that, but I think that when there's you go to Exodus chapter 18 where it talks about the you don't have to bring it up, but just for scripture reference for you people. Exodus is in the second book of the Bible. Anyway, sorry. There's the story where was it Jethro went to Moses because Moses was his father-in-law. He was so overwhelmed with everything that he said, "Hey, you need to build a chain of command. You need to have this like structure here where you answer to, or 12 people answer to you, one from each tribe, and then they have people under them, and then they have people under them, to the point where there's this like literally a chain of command where these people, if there's a problem, they can handle the small stuff, and then you get to the big stuff when it happens." That model is realistically what you are a part of in the Army. And that's a model that is still used today in corporate America when you have department heads, vice presidents, CEOs, and all that kind of stuff. That model that Jethro came up with, which I think is kind of funny, because wouldn't you imagine that the Egyptians had something similar to this that Moses would have known about? So apparently it's almost as if Jethro's the one that thought of this. And actually, when I was in Navy leadership, the guy that was running the class, he said, he drew it out on the board, and he goes, "You know where this came from?" And I'm like, "Yes, Jethro." And he goes, "No." He goes, "Moses in the Bible, blah, 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 blah." And so I waited, and I found a little Gideon Bible, and I took me forever to find it because I knew it was in Exodus, but I was like, boom, look, Jethro's idea. And he goes, okay, I see what you meant. Like, but, you know, I grew up in church, so I remember the name because it was Jethro Bodine from Beverly Hillbillies. I remember that. But there's the model. Okay, can that model happen today? Yes, that model can happen today. It happens today. There are churches that have in North Carolina. I remember hearing a church that it was independent. It wasn't Church of God, but it was Pentecostal. But it came out of the Baptist church, so there was a lot of the deacon roots that was still there, and so the pastor was trying to get away from that deacon model that they were in.
Because deacons were never meant to be the teaching and all this stuff. Deacons were servants. If you go back to like the book of Acts and then you go to First Timothy chapter 3.
And those deacons were controlling everything. And he was having an issue with this one particular guy. And he said that he was, you know, in prayer about it. And he was reading through and he's like, you know, I think we're going to do the elders and deacons, have them both. But we're going to, and so some of them, the deacon side people that he was having issues with, he brought them into the elder side, and he said that one guy who'd been giving him trouble for years just fit right in and was perfect for that spot. And so, but what he did at his church and they pulled 200, 250 or whatever, each elder had a deacon that those two worked together, and they had so many people in the church, and they were essentially over them to the point where if there was a problem, they could call them instead of the pastor. And so those guys would work together, and they would do it for so many years, and then they would switch up. And I don't know how they district it out or how they did it like a restaurant where the next one comes in is yours or whatever. I don't know how they did that, but if that's the model that you set and it works, and you have these leaders and their wives and the families, and they all run this section of the church and teach and guide and counsel and pray with but yes, there's a senior pastor, but here's this group of people together that do all these things. It seems that it would be easier on a 300, 400 person to do that, but that's what these bigger churches do. It's just much, much larger numbers. They have those people who come in, some of them, when they fill out the little piece of paper and they'll call you back. Where do you live? Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, we were just there visiting. They're like, okay, well, if you ever come back, this and that. And we went to Free Chapel, and that was an hour and 25-minute drive to Free Chapel. And it was at the end of the fast. And so the first Sunday at the end of the fast, we went to Free Chapel. And so they called and they said, hey, you know, where do you live? We told them, we're like, oh, you know, we have people that are up there that come to church here. I'm like, they drive an hour and a half every Sunday. I'm like, yeah. And so they were trying to create that deal where we would be associated with them, even though we're way up in Clayton, Franklin, and it created that model based off where we lived geographically. And that was them. Do they all do that? I don't know. Cause the church I go to, we don't have them numbers, but it's,
so there is a
problem with that.
I went to an elders conference one time at a church called Parkview Baptist Church in Rock Hill, South Carolina. And it was a really good experience. The church was about a size of 400 members, active members.
That sounds familiar. Is that where that big charismatic church is?
No, it's a little south of Charlotte, like literally probably a half hour south of Charlotte.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Right on the border. But anyways, yeah, they had an elders conference. They ran a church that was probably about 400 active members, maybe 500 to 600 participants or people that would actively go, but about 300 to 400 members. Anyways, they had that you were just talking about, and we got to see in that elder conference basically how they do their eldership. And it was exactly what you described, where they basically have elders and they go, elders, okay, these are your people. And they split the people up and be like, these are your people. And if they have something, they want counseling, because this is part of an elder's role. The senior pastor or the teaching pastor, the speaking, he is just, in the biblical model, in my opinion, he is just another elder. He just has the main teaching role. And yes, obviously, usually that's the one that's paid and things of that nature. But power-wise, he is the just another elder. And the elders of the church, the other elders besides the teaching pastor, would have this kind of zone defense where they had different groups within the church. So that way, if people had issues, just like Jethro, just like you described, bring up the two and go through that elder. And I thought that was a really awesome model. They also did the exact same thing with the deacons for servant needs. Instead of, the deacon of the week, like some churches have, or the deacon of the month, they would have deacons. Hey, these are your people. So when issues arise that because deacons, once again, servants, they can go to their deacon or they can go to their elder. And if you were a member of that local church, you knew exactly who your deacon or your elder was. And they would stay in contact with you. They'd link up with you once a month, things of that nature. I thought that was a wonderful, wonderful model. Like you said, I think it works out better in a smaller church, like a mid-sized church, but it can happen in a megachurch. I can concede that point.
And I mean, you're just going to have more levels before you get to the top,
Yeah. I mean, I know there was one church, it was over in Lufkin, Texas. My good friend was going to, and I can't.
Dude, that's a drive.
Yeah, that's a drive. But
my 2 hours.
He lived there. He was doing recruiting for the Army. But he invited us to his church when we came to visit one time. I went over there, and it was I would consider it a mega church, stadium seating. I don't know how many active people were actually there. Definitely over 1,000. Anyways, that church, he ended up, sadly leaving that church. And it was due to the fact it was so hard because that church did not have elders. That church, the senior pastor controlled everything. And he was only able to in order to talk to the pastor, you had to wait weeks upon weeks to get on his calendar, which was, very sad. They actually, I remember now, they did have elders, but they were like elders in name only. They were basically powerless.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So
number 5. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, go on.
I'm just saying number 5, when we roll through some of these community and fellowship opportunities, kind of hit on that. But one of the things that I really liked about what Brian Cutshaw said about Two Rivers is that they had 2 different types of small groups. They had faith-based and activity-based. And so, like, their faith-based small groups could be basically what we had talked about, where, you meet up with different people, men meet up, women meet up, whatever, kids, teens. But then they had the activity-based deal where they would be like 4-wheelers, and we're going to have a 4-wheeler ride. And they had this spot, and then everybody would show up on 4-wheelers and ride. Or, which I think every church needs this. Honestly, I will stand on this forever. I think every church needs to have the activity things that brings people together in fellowship. It doesn't, every time you get together, you don't have to open the Bible and study. You can get together, love on each other, and have a great time. Even, I brought this up one time, was in Georgia, and this lady thought she was being really funny. And she said, "Oh yeah, we can all go get our pedicures and manicures." And I said, "Yes, y'all go do that. Y'all go hang out together, be a community, be a group of people, and go do that. Guys, go fly fishing. Guys, go, or kids, let's go horseback riding for all you people. At Christway, they used to have a motorcycle gang, right? And every third Sunday, they would be like, it was way before you got there. Every third Sunday, they'd have like 30 motorcycles out there, and people would stick around to hear them leave, because it was just, and they would take off, and they'd go ride like a huge 3-hour loop and come back. And then but they would hang out together. They would spend time together. They would, if there was times that they would pray with people while they're eating in a restaurant in Texas or whatever. And it was that element of fellowship is a very missed opportunity. And I think that it could be done that way. And like, there was one in San Diego that once a month, the church rented a section of Qualcomm Stadium, and they went to Padres games as a church. They would pick a game and they'd go. And it was just, they would hang out in the parking lot. They would walk around and they would pray with people. They would ask for prayer requests. They'd write them down and they'd pray with them right then. But at the end of it, they'd bring it all together, and the entirety of the church would pray over these prayer requests. But then as soon as 30 minutes before the game starts, Padres jersey, let's go watch a game, And that's something I would like to do. LSU games, whatever. Go to the parking lot. Everybody's drinking. Go walk around there and say, hey, what is your number one prayer request? And that can be a group of churches come together, and that community and opportunities for fellowship can be that too. And I think that's important. And you really have greater opportunities in a larger church with that, because you have more people to do it with. You have more fun, because you got at your church, there might be 50 people and you might be the only one that likes to kayak fish, but you might be the only one that likes to do that. Well, you go to a church and there's 300, 400, 500 people there, and you say something about kayak fishing, and you find out there's 10 guys that want to do it. Okay, cool. Let's go kayak fish. Let's pick a river, pick a lake, and let's go have fun, And so to me, that gives you more of that opportunity. And of course, I'll finish my rant there.
No. And you're right. That's one of we're going over our pros and cons now. That is one of the pros to the megachurch. You're never going to be able to, in one small church, pull up your resources like you could in a big megachurch, a community outreach, mass evangelism like that in your local community. It's a driving force. While I particularly don't like this church at all, and I really, my advice would be to stay away. And I know you would have different advice, but a good example of that is, go look at Bethel Church out of Redding, California. They basically took over Redding. Now, if you agree with them, you're going to say that's a good thing. But that's something that a church can do when you're a megachurch. You can basically kind of take over a town, essentially, and evangelize that town. We'll get into the Bethel debate one day. But
I went to Seattle. I met a guy from Bethel. We had a long talk. We talked for a while.
Yeah, I mean, that's up in the Northwest, because Bethel's up in the Redding's in the Northwest, California, up there. So another thing was the talking about our pros and cons was that program outreach. Like we said, that's the pro. But then, my con, I guess, to offer to that would be the consumerism and performance-based metrics that a lot of megachurches tend to go off of. We see a lot of ambiguous numbers. So say this. I've seen this time and time again, where a megachurch will do a mass baptism, and they say, we had 5,000 people come to the Lord today and they were baptized. Okay, where's the fruit that is going to come out of that? That number sounds great right off the bat. And in the early church, I would believe you, because there's a lot of persecution, no freedom, not really freedom to the religion, things of that nature. But in this church age, in America, Western society, that's not personally, and I hate to say it, but in my mind it's true, that's not really telling me much. When you have people just having these open baptism nights where anybody can jump in there, get baptized, as opposed to that what I see in a smaller church, that care going into, all right, let's talk about your testimony, let's talk about this XYZ. Great example, this last church that I'm attending just moved to Oklahoma about a little less than a year ago. And the church I'm going to, we probably have about 100 members and maybe about 150 total people going there. And when I said I wanted to become a member of that church, the pastor came to my house, sat down with me, asked me my testimony, asked my wife his testimony, basically just affirming that we are Christians.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, if as long as your testimony is good, you're not going to deny it. But that's something that a good local pastor, local elder, whatever, that's something that they do, is they want to make sure that before you get, let's just say you're a new convert into Christianity and you want to get baptized into that, into the faith, they'll do that due diligence, as opposed to, once again, that whole open baptism thing. And going back to my main point, the consumerism and the numbers driven side. We had this many people come to Christ, and we had this many people. Billy Graham had this amazing thing before he died. Well, it wasn't really amazing. It was kind of sad. So he estimated that roughly about 25% of those people who came and did altar calls at his mass evangelism events actually remained a Christian and stayed in the faith. They did a small sample size audience and a testing from his last crusade, one of his later crusades, up in the Pacific Northwest area. I can't remember exactly, but out of that sample size, they found that only, I think it was around 14% remained Christians that confess that they went up to that altar call and made a profession of faith. And one of the reasons why was because that discipleship was not following that. Now, I'm not saying that can't happen in a megachurch. We've listed out reasons how that can happen. But the propensity for the discipleship to fall to the wayside and just want to report numbers, is much higher, I think, in that megachurch world. Look, we're winning. We're doing things.
So do you not do the crusades because only 14% are going to stick around?
No, you're going to do them.
So then what's the catch to, yeah, okay, maybe there was people who jumped in that pool and shouldn't have been jumping in that pool. Maybe those numbers are inflated.
Billy Graham was an evangelist.
I'm talking about the numbers. Yeah, okay, numbers can be inflated, and we all do. I mean, it's easy to do. We have to be careful with that. But you don't know who's coming out of it. You don't know the one person that's coming out that you don't know yet because they're brand new, and then you never see them or hear, oh, but they spent the next 30 years in Africa reaching people, and because they were part of that baptismal where they said 5,000, but it was really only 2,100. Yeah, I don't know, maybe 5,000 people were baptized, but people get caught up and do stuff through that anyway. And I think that for me, I understand what you're saying, right? And it's easy to inflate numbers. It's easy to make it look or to embellish. I don't know. I hope they're not lying. It's easy to get caught up in what happened.
I don't think they're lying.
And who? Well, okay. Well, it's easy to get caught up in the number of people that went through and say that's what happened, right?
Yeah, I don't think they're lying in that, the number of people who went through.
But your desire to reach people and not knowing if they'll stick around or not, you don't know, and it may be that they're only there, they're active duty or whatever, and 3 weeks later they get sent to another duty station and they do great things there because of what happened there. And so you have to, and there's a element of you get a word, you write the word, you study it out, you spend the time in prayer, you spend the time getting ready, you go on Facebook, you go in front of a pulpit, you preach that word the way God gave it to you, and you may never, ever, ever know if it hit anybody. You may never do, but you did what you were supposed to do. And if that's what they were called to do in that moment, was to have those open times, again, I hope they're not lying about it. And if they're not, then I'm not going to be against it or be tearing down at all, because there's a possibility of that, because that can happen anywhere, And so you were talking about performance. There are parts of that mega church worship that is silly to me, right? I grew up in a church that was small enough to where when you come back from Sunday school, the music was playing and you walk straight up into the choir loft and you grab the redback hymnal and you sang 3 songs, 4 songs, whatever. And then they'd have a special song and then the pastor would preach. And it was interactive. I was allowed to be a part of that. It didn't matter how old I was. I could do it. And then when I got to a certain age and they figured out I could sing a little bit, and they put me in charge of it sometimes. They would be like, hey, you're leading choir today. Okay, cool, let's do it. And you start picking through songs and stuff, trying to figure it out. That model is awesome for the people who enjoy it, and if that's what you grew up in, a lot of times that's what you get, that's what you want, because that's what you grew up in, so let's get back to the megachurch thing, the performance-based stuff. Sometimes when you have 4,000 people, you can't have them all up on the stage at the same time, right? And sometimes I think it's good that you have a praise team that is held to a standard of their faith, and that you don't just get anybody in that choir who last night was drinking at the Sun, or what was the name of the bar where I grew up? Sun something. I don't remember. It was shut down years ago. Sundance, the Sundance bar, right? They was at the Sundance last night, but they're in the choir this morning. And at least with that, there is their famous group, Bethel, Jesus Culture, Kim Walker Smith. is but back in the day was one of the big voices for Jesus culture. And I love her singing. I love the way she, does stuff. Anyway, I know you don't like her, whatever. But she was rejected from the praise and worship group for 3 years because they didn't feel that she was in, even with her talent, they didn't feel like she was there spiritually. And they will let just anybody sing in small churches. If hey, you can sing good, woo, let's go. And
It depends.
Yeah, it depends. But you have to be really careful. And I can tell you that most of the churches I grew up in, if you could play piano really good, they overlooked some things.
Oh no,
they shouldn't have done that. They shouldn't have done that, but they did. And again, it goes back to my argument is that it happens on big, small, medium. It happens everywhere. So don't throw out the big because some of the big are bad. I wouldn't want you to throw out the little because some of the little are bad. Because there's some good churches out there. There's good people out there.
Like we come back. I do want to say this. Y'all are throwing some good fire comments in there. We are going to get them after this.
We got about another
little bit more time.
Yeah, and then we'll get into that.
Yeah. I did want to. Do you care if I play a video?
I don't care.
Okay, so this was one of my fears of basically of the discipleship.
There's no fear in love.
No, there is none. It would probably help if there you go. You could see.
Don't say fear. Don't use the word fear.
Okay, so here we go. So this is one of my I'm just gonna say fear. But anyways, this is one of my fears of seeing
concern is the word.
The lack of concern. The lack of discipleship that you may get. And here's a video, just a random video. This is a popular clip that's been kind of floated around before, but let's just go ahead and play it, and you'll see. This is why I'm afraid when it comes to these, not discipling people, not filtering people through when it comes to baptism and things like that, because then you're gonna have people walking around thinking something that's totally different. Here's an example.
I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and then we're going to go ahead and begin to baptize people tonight. Two of those questions is, one is your name, and the second of all is why you're being baptized tonight. And so let's start with you. What was your name, and why are you wanting to be baptized tonight?
My name's Michaela.
And why are you wanting to be baptized?
Oh, Jesus is King. I love him so much, and I'm a child of God.
Come on, give her a round of applause, man. That's awesome.
Is this Bethel and Redding?
Friend, why'd you come over?
I'm not exactly sure, but
she was American sounding, but he wasn't.
Yeah, here, just keep listening. I'm not sure where it is.
I read the line across the bottom.
Yeah, it's more so the example of you don't have to pay attention to the church, but yeah, keep watching.
But tell us your name and tell us why you're being baptized tonight.
Hi, I'm Crystal, and I just know that God is calling me to be a warrior for his animal kingdom, and that I'm to lead an army of angels to protect animals across the world. And I just know I can't do it without God.
Come on, give Christoph a round of applause. That's amazing, sweet. That's amazing.
Okay, so she
your hiccup is that they didn't delete the video.
So anyways, she goes on to get baptized,
right?
In the video, and that's not a testimony. Why are you getting baptized? Because God wants me to lead angels of armies to save the animal kingdom. That's my worry when it comes to the big mega church, open baptism night, like 5,000 souls baptized today, in the name of Jesus Christ. I pray that woman has gone on to have a good testimony, but wanting to be a warrior for the animal kingdom, I don't think was a reason to get baptized. I believe it's faith in Jesus Christ. Now we can find some examples like that in the smaller church. I am sure of people not being careful when it comes to baptism, but I go back to that argument that I said of basically it's out there more for the world to see in the mega world, and it is the propensity, the recipes I feel like are there. Not that they're going to be active. It's kind of like a tornado. I live in Tornado Alley in Oklahoma, and they always say, when there's a possible tornado outbreak, hey, the recipe for a tornado is here. All the, the warm air from the Gulf is colliding in with the cool air from the north and X, Y, and Z and all this weather stuff. Not saying that a tornado is going to happen, but the recipe is there. And that is ultimately, once again, why I go back to what I see with the mega church world is the recipes are there and that tornado could happen. Anyway.
So you went over the first girl though. The first girl I'm just saying the first girl was fantastic. Did you
I wasn't paying attention on that one.
She couldn't barely stand up. It was so heavy on her. It's pretty crazy. It's cool. Anyway, his presence is so cool. So amazing.
Do you want to go to the comments? Or
well, hold on a second. Let me look. The role of media, tech, social media, and megachurch growth. I mean, I
think that's a good thing.
It can be a great thing, and they can because they especially exactly, especially because there's a much larger group of young people who know how to do that stuff, who know how to use Chat GPT and Canva and make videos and have a team of people that run around and take pictures during service or video or whatever. I don't have a problem with that. I know you do.
I think it's disruptive to, like, you have a scene of everybody.
If you are God. So focused on what somebody walking around the sanctuary is doing with a camera, then I would challenge you to re-examine your worship time with Jesus. I would
challenge you to challenge the reverence of people when we call or to praise and worship God. When the opening and reading of scripture goes on, that is the word of God being read. I don't think it's appropriate to have somebody snapping pictures of that, walking around and doing all this stuff like a giant production show. You will have a big church, great, but don't make a spectacle out of it like it's a commercial marketing scheme.
But you would have never noticed it if somebody wouldn't have made a video and talked about them faking it. Have you ever been to church that people walk around taking pictures?
No, but I've seen all the social media out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't have a problem with somebody walking around with the camera or a boom arm coming down and videoing the pastor while he's preaching, or somebody taking a picture of people listening. I don't have a problem with that. I don't. And I don't think that's, if it's distraction, then you gotta be careful with it. I mean, obviously they don't stand there the whole time and do it. I mean, the ones that I've been to that have that, they'll just all of a sudden they're there, snap a couple pictures, and then they're gone. Again, I understand you're talking about being reverent to and this is a different conversation, but I understand you're talking about being reverent to the situation, but at the same time, we live in reverence to the situation. And that should be a nonstop 24/7. We don't just go to church on the Sabbath. Every day is the Sabbath, right? And every day is a constant yielding to the Spirit, what he's doing. If you're going to do that, there's an opportunity for you to have a 30-second TikTok clip of the church service or whatever. I think that there's nothing different from that than what we're doing right now. I have
here's the difference. Here's the difference. And the difference is this. If I decided to bust out my phone because, wow, this is an amazing moment of God and I want to capture it real quick, that's one thing. What I'm opposed is the mega churches, because you really only see this in mega churches. Smaller churches may have it, but I really only see it in the mega churches. Have someone called their social media pastor or their social media person. And their entire point of existence in that church is to go around during praise and worship sessions and photography, everybody doing their thing. I like what Brian said, and I know it's more alongside my lines, and I hope you know where I'm not trying to beat up on you, but how's the person running around?
You're not going to beat up on me. But then you get into so how many services do they go to? Like you're seeing one. Most of the time when you're in that model, you go to one service as the church attendee, and the other service, you're the worker. Most of the time, that's the way that model goes that I have been a part of, that I have noticed that. I get what you're saying, but I don't see there being any difference in being reverent to God on Sunday morning versus right now. We have to be reverent to God. And if we're on cameras and we're on live on the internet, which is still crazy to me, being reverent. And if that person is doing that, they're snapping pictures. Now, if they're standing in front of you and you can't hear the pastor because he's in the way, yeah, obviously, you got to be careful with that. But if somebody slides down, snaps a picture, or a video camera gets an angle and leaves, I don't personally have a problem with it. I know you don't like it, but
biblically speaking, and this is me, and I feel free to disagree. God has, there was the Sabbath in the Old Testament. There are specific times that we set aside as holy to God. And I think one of those times is when we gather together as a body and we're worshiping God, whether it's through psalm, whether it's through the preaching and teaching of his word. I don't see it as appropriate. That's just my opinion. Like I said, you could feel free to disagree with it.
I disagree with it.
Oh, good.
I don't see the difference between me being 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning at work and 10 o'clock Sunday morning at church. I have to be in reverence to the Creator at all times.
You do, but we see
to give one moment more than it takes away from the time I have other than that. So that's just my perspective. I know I'm a little more charismatic in that. So that's fine. But what's the fix, man? I don't know. I don't think that me and you can fix it. I think me and you can just bring it up.
There is no fix. Like I said, I offered mine already. What I thought would be a good model instead of the megachurch is the church plant, the church revitalization, growing out instead of growing up, I guess you would say. That would be my fix.
Right. And I think that it would be good to make sure that there's accountability in the organization, make sure that there's a good chain of command, make sure that however you structure it, whatever you do, that there's a good accountability in that. Make sure the money is not being money laundered. Make sure all that stuff's being right. What's big church, small church, and grow big, grow wide, grow big. I don't care. As long as what you're doing is furthering the kingdom, that doesn't matter to me.
And I think because Jonathan and I, while we might get heated in our talk sometimes, we love each other and we affirm each other as brothers in Christ. In-house talk right here. We do agree on certain things. Like I can come to the agreement that, hey, mega churches are able to reach so many people simply because of the status that they have. I'm not denying that they have that ability to reach. And like I said in the beginning, there are good mega churches out there. There are mega churches that I listen to. Like I love, Bethany Bible up there in Michigan. I love Grace Community Church over there in California.
Wait, what was Adrian Rogers? Where did he pastor at? Adrian
I don't know. I'd have to go look that up.
Let's look it up.
Be careful, Brian's on. He don't like Adrian Rogers.
I love it. As a Pentecostal kid, he was the only one that I like to listen to, even though I disagree with him. Adrian Rogers.
I didn't like his points on Calvinism. I thought he was wrong.
I didn't like his point on this when he made some comment one time, and I was in my church. I was in the bathroom doing work in there, and I had him listening, and he said some stuff about people who believe certain things. And I looked at my dad and the pastor, and I'm like, he's not always right. But it was pretty fun. I like one thing that he said that I'll never forget, ever, 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 is he said I would gladly spend eternity in hell if God would go with me. And I'll never forget that. That was great.
That's So like I said, there are things that we agree on. And both Jonathan and I's overall desire is to see the gospel spreading, to see more people come to Christ, to see lives change, to see people brought from death unto life, change life, discipleship, fruit. That's what we want. That's what we want to see. That is both of our desires. And we can agree on that.
Holy cow. You should look at Bellevue. It's Bellevue Baptist Church in Memphis, Tennessee. If you go on their website and just look at the size of that church, it's huge, massive. Anyway, I liked him. I don't care what Brian thinks. And he's Baptist. How about that?
What Brian doesn't like, we can get into it another day. It was just his view on some of the parables.
I don't know.
Yeah. So, anyways, I do want to go over here before we get off here and go to the comments, because it's important to get the feedback from people. So, first one we have over here from Pathway to Truth. He says, "Is it okay to have a store inside your church?" That's an interesting point. I have not. My initial inclination is no, but I would research more on it. I'd be willing to listen to points to see if my opinion would change, but my initial inclination would be no.
So I remember this first time I ever saw one, and I thought, well, that's strange. And most of the time, it's Bibles, it's Bible literature, it's Bible stuff helps. It might be a thing. There's probably not cigarettes in there. It's church related, and of course, if the pastor's written a book or all that kind of stuff, video, DVDs, CDs of different bands or whatnot. I mean, if it's the Galilean in Leesville, they're open from 9 to 4 Monday through Friday. So if you have a 9 to 5 job, you don't get to go to the Galilean in Leesville, but I can go to the church and get it. I don't have a problem.
Yeah, like I said,
now, as long as that money is being handled properly, I don't have a problem with it.
Yeah, and like I said, that's why I'm willing to research more and be convinced otherwise.
I think it's a case by case.
Yeah, that probably I can fall on that case by case basis. Brian put out here, Range 01. Yeah, I went to Southeast, Christian church in Louisville. Don't say Louisville.
That's Louisville. Good job. I was wondering if you'd say it right.
No, good job. When I was a random offshoot, when I was a young, brand new private in the Army, I was small time dating this girl from Louisville, and I said Louisville, and that date ended right there.
You should know, being from Ohio, how to say Louisville.
Even though it's across from. I'm from Northern Ohio. We're a different breed than Southern Ohio. But anyways, he says in the early 2000s, it was huge, 10,000 plus in one service. Wow, that is huge. And then he's added, it did feel more like a concert than a church. And that is one of the things, and we didn't really talk about that very much. I guess one of the things you want to look that up?
Brian, if you're still watching, I'm trying to, but I'm not. Who was the pastor back then? Of course, it's got controversy now.
Yeah. And that's going to be some depending on what you feel. Like some people would look at the concert style of praise when we're worshiping God in church. They would not like that. I'm definitely more of that mindset. When I was younger, I used to love it. As I grow older, I'd much rather have a hymnal in my hand. That's just my personal opinion. We can get into that in another exploring the secondary.
That's a tertiary conversation for later.
Yes,
absolutely. Yes, so, and I know you don't like it, whatever. Hillsong United came to Shreveport a couple years back, and Christine and I drove up there, and she wanted to go. So I was like, absolutely. So we went up there, had a great time. And I love that she came out and she said, hey, this is not a concert. This is a worship service. Do not look at this as a concert. This is just a worship service. And that's what it was. And I enjoyed it. According to this, Southeast Christian Church pastor salary is $57,449 a year. That's it.
That's it. That's
17% above national average. That for a church that size, that's crazy. Should be more than that. According to the Bible, a pastor's primary function is to serve as a shepherd, guiding and caring for the church's spiritual well-being. How can a pastor do this in megachurch? Again, to that, I saw that earlier. That fits to the model of chain of command. How many pastors are there? Are you talking a senior pastor? How many associate pastors? How many youth pastors are there? Is there a pastor for different groups? Even the SBC is acknowledging the importance of a youth pastor to the point where they won't even allow women youth pastors. So apparently, a pastor in the youth side is important, right? Yes, they weren't mentioned in the Bible, but you know what? A lot of stuff. Neither was, cars, except for the Honda. But and one Accord. Anyway, to me, in my opinion, is yes, it is important. All these points are absolutely possible and true. How can a pastor do this in mega church? And it has to be done through chain of command. It has to be done through a list of pastors.
Yeah, because I think one thing we can both agree on with this is that the senior pastor CEO mega church role is not a good model. You need elders, you need deacons, you need that chain of command, almost like you said. Really, like now we may differ on this. I would much rather see the church governed by multiple elders as opposed to a senior pastor and then elders underneath him. But the one thing we can agree on is there needs to be more than just one person running that show where the pastor is the be all say all. Agree or disagree?
Agree to disagree.
Oh, okay.
I don't necessarily think that. I mean, I'm not a huge Episcopal person. I don't think that one pastor should have ultimate and total control. I think that I'm a congregational person more than I am. I don't have a problem at all. The elder model is great. Let's do it. Run with it. I don't like the idea of one guy at the top. If it's one guy at the top and 5 or 6 elders underneath him that he answers to, I don't have a problem with that as much as one guy all by himself up there.
Yeah, and this happens in small churches too. And I know we're live on your Facebook, so somebody may see this. And Pastor Vic, I love you to death. One thing that I never liked when I was going to Christ Way Church was, at the end of the day, it was Pastor Vic's say. If Pastor Vic did not approve,
well, there is a board, there is a council. There's a board.
I know, and most of them didn't even go to the church, I think, from what I remembered anymore. But unless that changed, that might have changed. No love lost though. I love you, Pastor Vic. Still, you guys preach the gospel over there, and that's what matters. I like what Rain 01 said, but the size alone doesn't make a church good or bad. It's the fruit it produces and the foundation it stands on. I think that's another one that we both agree on.
Yep, 100%.
Mm-hmm. Elaine, it's all 91. What's up? Yeah,
it's 10 o'clock already.
I know we're getting there. We start wrapping up soon, but I didn't want to ignore these comments.
Yeah.
She said, a pastor noticing, going back to what I was talking about, pastor noticing your absence or one-on-one interaction is typically not happening in most megachurches, at least in her opinion, or from her experience, the one that I was in the 80s and 90s. Brian came back, said some megachurches have been criticized for focusing more on a celebrity type leader. Yeah, that's, and like you said, Jonathan, that's not just one denomination. That's multiple different theological circles that have been guilty of that.
I don't like that. I wish that it was get away from that, but
yeah, I am not a fan of the celebrity pastor mindset. If we can get away from it stinks because there are some people that are truly gifted by God and they preach and teach the word so amazing. But how do we still listen to them and they don't get on that celebrity pastor status? Because people are ultimately going to do that,
especially if you're good at what you're called to do.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those things. God knows the answer. Elaine said it was all a marketing dynamic. Felt like if Jesus was here, he would be flipping over tables or maybe tossing out video cameras.
And I guess she's talking about the store. I don't know.
I think she was talking about the social media stuff. Marketing.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have an issue with social media at the church, as in like you're broadcasting your church services. I don't know if that's what you were talking about, Elaine. Like, I don't mind that. We actually just did an episode a few weeks ago. I brought in a guy from Louisiana over there, David from this YouTube channel, Faith and Photos. And we talked about online church. Like, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? And one of the things we both agreed on, though, was it's good to live stream your services for those who are sick or can't get out, or maybe just somebody randomly searches a passage and that church pops up. That's one of the good things. And honestly, I have to admit this, even though I'm not on the megachurch side, I don't think we would be where we are today in the smaller churches when it comes to social media and Facebook Live and all this stuff if it wasn't for the larger churches.
So I don't think that he would be flipping over tables because I think if he walked in the church, he'd be preaching. And I get what you're saying, though. I get it. I don't think he tossed out cameras because the word is getting out that way. And again, I'll fall back on my view that if you're distracted by people walking around the sanctuary, then that's not my fault. Obviously, if I'm being overly super distracted, then yeah, I get it. But I don't what we see normally in a normal scenario. I don't agree with that. However, let me ask this: what is the element of the I forgot what I was going to say now. Listen, you were talking about. Lord help me remember it. I can't remember what you just said. I know you just said something. I didn't want to leave her topic without getting onto the other. I didn't want to leave hers without mentioning my part of that. But yeah. So CCLI, right? Okay, so it's something that it drives me crazy. I don't like it, and I absolutely abhor it. But I understand people got to make money and they got to do their thing, whatever. So if God gives you a song and you write the song, and CCLI is what? What's it stand for? Copyright, Christian copyright,
something licensing.
Yeah. So basically, if I write a song, and I publish the song, and then your church sings that song, and they put the words on the screen or whatever, then there's just like at a radio station, when you play a song on a radio station, a little bit of money goes to the money to the guy, to the producers, to the person who wrote the song, person who recorded the song, and all that. Same kind of thing happens at CCLI. So if Chris Tomlin writes a song, then a little bit of money goes to him. I mean, he wrote a song. That's his ministry. I don't have a problem with that as much, but some of the rules they have just drives me crazy. But Craig Rochelle, Life Church, everything's open source. When they're done with it, it's open source. No, they don't charge anything. You're allowed to use any of their stuff, music, whatever, free. Right?
I did notice that about
they allow, and he even has his sermon notes. You use them, rewrite them, whatever. Use the notes, twist it in your way, whatever God's laid on you. I mean, I'm saying no. Well, I mean, I don't.
I know.
Preaching like you never know. But anyway, so the thing being that it to them, they open source it. Do what you got to do. Tesla, open source it. All the stuff Tesla could be making, all the money they're making, it's open source. Everything that's in that car is open source. That's way to me, in my mind, that's the way the church needs to be. I preached the sermon last Sunday that was just straight me and God. I never heard anybody preach something along those lines. And so if somebody wanted to use that and run with it and teach something based off that, which would be crazy to think of that, it's even a possibility, then by all means, touch the kingdom of God with it. I don't have a problem with it. Run with it. But that's me.
We definitely should get into the plagiarism debate one day.
Well, there's a difference between plagiarism and preaching the topic, right? So you can even go as far as say, if you start preaching out of the Beatitudes, that you're plagiarizing Jesus. It's not the same thing. And if you preach a sermon and it's got great points, and I take those points, I say, hey, Tim Pergo made these points, blah blah blah, and I twist them and put a new verse to it, or like not twist them, like don't distort them. But if I redo that one based off of yours and it reaches somebody, then we all work together for the kingdom. I don't have a problem with that. I know you might.
I just Elaine wanted to clarify her point, so I just wanted to, so that way she didn't feel unjustified. And she said I was referring to the videotaping and pictures during the entire service. Worship and preaching, very distracting and irreverent. And then she also said it was for advertising and marketing purposes, very obvious. So not talking about live streaming the sermons, basically. Which thank you for that clarification, Elaine. Yeah. So I think we're about that. Man, we're hour 40. We thought this was going to be like a half hour.
Yeah.
Hey, I mean, overall,
so in conclusion, for me, on my side of it, I know that I'm putting this on my personal Facebook page. There's a lot of people that are going to watch this that are going to agree with you, not me, and that's fine. I'm cool with that. I've no problem with that. I've been in churches 400, 500, 600 people and larger. It's different. It's different. But I cannot just automatically say I think it's wrong or I disagree with it. I don't think it's unbiblical. I think that it's just different. And if I go to South Korea and I walk into the church and there's 800,000 people going through there on a Sunday, it's going to be crazy. But I'd be willing to go if I was there. I want to see what's going on. I can't understand what they're saying, but I would love to be a part and see what is going on here that these people are doing this in that way. So, yeah, I just pray that they're doing it the right way. That's 10,000 and that's 10. Do it the right way. Focus on Jesus. Show the love of the Father. Quench not the Holy Spirit, and do your thing.
Yeah, I just wanted to end it on Brian's note because I thought it was perfect. Size alone doesn't make a church good or bad. Fruit it produces, the foundation it stands on. That's, I think, a really appropriate way to end this out and showing how we both agree on that.
100%.
So, Jonathan, want to pray us out?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
I'm Pentecostal enough that I can't have my hat on when I pray. Lord, we love you. We thank you for this day. Lord, first and foremost, we thank you for your son, Jesus, who died on the cross. Without him, none of this is possible. Without him, there's no chance for heaven. We thank you for that blood that was shed on the cross, Lord. And as we come close to Resurrection Sunday, Lord, we ask that you allow us to remember that completely. It is about what you did with him on Calvary that day 2,000 years ago. We thank you for all your love and your mercy. Lord, we ask that you allow this to touch people, to have fun, but to also to edify the kingdom in all that we do. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. All right. We'll talk to y'all later.
Bye.
Bye.